The rain came down so hard it sounded like the sky was trying to wash the town off the map. And in the middle of that rain, a 30-year-old woman stood at the edge of a gas station parking lot with a sleeping child on her shoulder, $9 in her coat pocket, and a small iron key hanging from a leather cord around her neck. She was staring at a rusted RV with a hand-painted sign taped to its side that read, "For sale, $10. People who saw her that night laughed. They said she had finally lost what little she had left. They said no woman in her right mind would hand over her last bill for a heap of metal that couldn't even start. But what they did not know, what nobody in Hollis Creek knew, was that inside the walls of that broken-down RV there was a door, a locked door, and behind it 22 letters from a father she had buried in her heart 22 years ago. Before we go any further, friend, if stories like this one settle something quiet inside you, take a moment and tap the subscribe button. It costs you nothing, and it lets me keep telling these stories to people who still believe that the worn and forgotten things in this world can hold the most beautiful truths. And while you're down there, let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight and what time it is on your clock. I like to picture you. Now come closer. Let me tell you what happened to Hattie Mercer the night her mother stopped looking at her. The fight had not been loud. That was the part that broke her most. Hattie had always thought the moment she lost her family would come with shouting, with thrown dishes, with the kind of words that ring in your ears for years. Instead, it came with a quiet voice and an unzipped backpack on the kitchen floor. Her stepfather, Lyle Pike, had stood in the hallway with his hands on his hips and his belt buckle catching the porch light. He had not yelled. He had simply said, "You and the girl are done here." Behind him, her mother, Verla, had not turned around. Verla had stood at the kitchen sink with both hands on the rim, the water running over a plate she was no longer washing, and she had not turned around. Hattie had waited. She had waited for her mother to say something, anything, a word, a look, a breath in her direction. But all she heard was the running water and the small, sleepy sound of Junie shifting on the couch behind her. So Hattie had picked up her daughter. She had picked up the backpack with 2 changes of clothes and the cracked plastic baby cup Junie still drank from at night. She had taken the little brown rabbit, the one with 1 ear chewed off from when Junie had been teething. And then she had walked out into the porch light and into the rain, and the screen door had closed behind her with a soft, almost polite click. That click stayed with her longer than any slammed door ever could. By the time she reached the end of the gravel road, the rain had soaked through her coat. Junie's small head was warm against her neck, too warm. The girl had a low fever that morning, the kind of fever that wasn't dangerous yet, but the kind a mother does not ignore. Hattie shifted her daughter higher on her hip and felt the iron key shift under her collar, tapping once against her collarbone the way it had tapped against her chest since she was 7 years old. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she had to keep walking. Hollis Creek, North Carolina was the kind of town where the streetlights gave up around 11, and the only thing left awake was the freight train cutting through the valley once an hour. The Blue Ridge Mountains sat behind the town like an old man with his back turned, big and silent and unmoved. Hattie had grown up under those mountains. She had once believed they were watching her. She did not believe that anymore. She walked along the shoulder of Route 9, past the boarded-up feed store, past the white clapboard church with the cracked bell, past the empty lot where the carnival used to set up every August when she was a child. Junie was sleeping now, breathing the slow, damp breath of a feverish child, and Hattie counted her breaths the way some women counted prayers. When she finally saw the lights of the Sunoco station up ahead, she almost cried, not from relief, from the simple fact that there was light, any light. She walked toward it the way a moth walks toward a porch lamp with no plan beyond the warmth. The cashier inside did not look up when she came in. He was watching a baseball game on a small television behind the counter. Hattie did not have the courage to ask for anything. She just stood by the rack of windshield fluid and let the warm air dry her face, and she counted the bills in her coat pocket again. $9, 1531s, and a single dollar coin she had found in the laundry 2 days before. That was everything she had in the world. She did not know what she was looking for when she stepped back out under the canopy. Maybe a phone she could borrow, maybe a bench, maybe just a longer minute before she had to admit out loud that she had nowhere to take her daughter. And then she saw it. Parked at the far edge of the lot beyond the dumpsters, half hidden under the broken neon of an old sign, sat a rusted RV. It had been a kind of cream color once. Now it was the color of an old tooth. The tires were holding, but barely. One window had a crack running diagonal from corner to corner, like a frozen lightning bolt. There was a piece of brown cardboard taped to the side. The lettering was crooked, written with a thick black marker by a hand that did not care if it was pretty. For sale. $10. Hattie laughed. It was not a real laugh. It was the small broken sound a person makes when the world has finally gone absurd enough to be funny. She walked closer because there was nothing else to walk toward. The rain had let up to a steady drizzle, the kind that gets into your bones without you noticing. Junie stirred against her shoulder and made a small sound. Hattie hushed her, kissed her temple, and felt the heat there. "Just a minute, baby," she whispered. "Just one more minute." She was reading the sign for the second time when she heard the footsteps behind her. "You looking?" The voice was low and gentle, the voice of a man who had spent a lot of years not raising it. Hattie turned. He was older, maybe 68, maybe 70, with white hair under a soaked feed cap and a green canvas jacket darkened across the shoulders by the rain. His face was deeply lined. His eyes were the careful kind, the kind that took a long time to make a decision and an even longer time to take it back. "I was just reading the sign," Hattie said. "Sign's true," the man answered. $10. She held the look. "Does it run?" He tilted his head slightly. "Sometimes." She almost laughed again. "That's not really an answer." "It's the only one I've got, ma'am." She glanced at Junie, still asleep, then back at him. "I only have 9. The man looked at her for a long moment. The rain pattered on the brim of his cap. Then his eyes drifted almost without him meaning to down to her throat, to the leather cord, to the small iron key resting against the collar of her wet shirt. His face changed. It was not big, the change. It was the kind of change you would miss if you weren't watching for it. But Hattie saw it. The lines around his mouth softened just slightly. His shoulders dropped just slightly, and his eyes stayed on that key a half-second longer than a stranger's eyes had any right to. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "may I ask where you got that key?" Hattie's hand rose automatic and closed around it. She could not have explained why. She had worn that key every day for 23 years. She had worn it through high school and through her wedding and through the slow falling apart of her marriage and through the years after. And not a single person had ever asked her about it. Not one. Until tonight. "My father gave it to me," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she meant. "When I was 7. The man closed his eyes for a breath. When he opened them, something in him had given way. "My name is Walter Ennis," he said, "and I've been waiting 6 years to meet you." Hattie did not move. The rain kept falling soft now, almost kind, and Junie's breath was warm against her neck, and somewhere far off the freight train sounded its long, low whistle through the valley. And Hattie did not move because she did not understand any of the words she had just heard. "I don't know you," she finally said. "No, ma'am," Walter answered, "but I knew your daddy." The world tilted just a little. "My father has been dead since I was 8 years old," Hattie said. The words came out flat. They were words she had said 1,000 times in her life in school, in doctors' offices, in church. They came out of her now the way a prayer comes out of someone who has stopped believing in it. Walter Ennis nodded slowly. He did not argue. He did not explain. He simply reached into the breast pocket of his canvas jacket and pulled out an envelope. It had been wrapped in a sandwich bag to keep the rain off. The paper inside was old, the color of weak tea, the corners soft from being held too many times. He held it out to her. "He told me. Walter said that one day a woman would come along wearing an iron key on a leather cord. He said when she did, I was to give her this. He told me her name. He told me I would know her by the key." Hattie did not take the envelope. She stared at it. "What name did he tell you?" she said. Walter swallowed. "Hattie Mercer." Hattie's knees nearly gave. She pressed her free hand against the cold metal side of the RV to steady herself, and Junie shifted on her shoulder and murmured something small in her sleep. "How?" Hattie whispered. "How could he have?" Walter shook his head. "Ma'am, I think the answers you want are not mine to give. I am only the man who promised to wait, and I have waited, and here you are." He stepped forward slowly, the way a man approaches a horse that has been frightened, and he placed the envelope into her free hand. He closed her fingers around it. "I don't want your $9, he said. "Take the RV. It's yours. He paid for it long before you were ever born. I have only been keeping it." Hattie looked down at the envelope. The flap was sealed with a single piece of yellow tape. Through the thin paper, she could feel the shape of something inside. Something flat, something rectangular, something the size of a folded bill. She did not open it. Not yet. Walter touched the brim of his cap the way men of his generation did when they meant respect. Then he turned and walked off across the parking lot toward the small white pickup truck at the far end. He did not look back. He climbed in, started the engine, and drove out onto Route 9, and his taillights grew small in the rain and were gone. Hattie stood alone under the broken neon with her sleeping daughter on her shoulder, an envelope in her hand, an iron key against her collarbone, and a rusted RV in front of her that somehow her dead father had bought. The cold came back to her slowly. She remembered Junie. She remembered the fever. She remembered that she still had nowhere to take her child. Except she did now. She climbed the 2 metal steps up to the door of the RV. The handle was loose. The door opened with a long, tired sigh. She stepped inside and the smell hit her first. And it was not the smell she had expected. It was the smell of cedar. Old dry cedar. The kind of smell that lives in cabin closets and in carpenter's drawers. Underneath it faintly was pipe tobacco, the brand her father used to smoke. She had not smelled it in 22 years, and the moment it touched her, her eyes filled. "Oh," she said. Just that. "Oh." She laid Junie down on the narrow couch behind the driver's seat. She pulled off her own wet coat and tucked it around her daughter. The little brown rabbit went under Junie's arm. The girl murmured and turned her face toward the back of the couch and was deeply asleep again in seconds. Hattie wiped her face with the heel of her hand and turned slowly in the small space, taking it in. The interior was worn, but it was clean. Someone had cared about this RV in a way that had nothing to do with money. There was a small kitchenette with a two-burner stove, a fold-down table, a narrow bed at the back made up with a quilt in a faded log cabin pattern, a row of cabinets above the bed, each one with a small brass pull. And on the wall above the kitchenette, framed in plain pine, hung a small carving of a chickadee wings, spread, head tilted, the wood polished smooth by years of someone's thumb. Hattie stopped breathing. She knew that carving. She knew it the way you know your mother's voice through a wall. Her father had carved birds. He had carved them on the porch on summer evenings while she sat at his feet with her knees pulled up under her nightgown. He had given her one when she was 6, a Wren. She had lost it in the move after he died, and she had cried for a week. She stepped closer to the wall. She reached up and touched the little chickadee with one fingertip. The wood was warm, or maybe she only imagined that. She turned slowly the way a person turns in a dream and walked the length of the RV toward the back, past the kitchenette, past the table, past the bed with its log cabin quilt, to the wall at the very back where she had assumed she would find another small cabinet or a window. But there was no cabinet there, and there was no window. There was a door. It was small, no taller than her shoulder, made of dark metal, the kind of metal they used on old ship lockers. There was no handle, no knob, only a small keyhole set into the center, and around that keyhole fine scratches in the paint, as if someone long ago had tried to force it open and given up. Hattie's hand rose slow to the cord around her neck. She lifted the iron key over her head. She held it up in front of the keyhole. It was a perfect match. The shape of the bow, the cuts on the bit, the small notch near the shoulder. She had been wearing the key to this door against her skin for 23 years and had never known it. A sound came out of her that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. She knelt down in front of the door. Behind her, Junie breathed slow and even on the couch. The rain had stopped somewhere while she was not paying attention. The world was very quiet. She slid the key into the lock. It went in like it had been waiting. She turned it. There was a small, soft, almost gentle click. The kind of click a thing makes when it has been waiting a long time to open. Hattie pulled the door toward her. It moved easily on hinges someone had kept oiled. Cool air came out, dry and clean, smelling faintly of paper and cedar. Inside, in the small lighted space behind the door, was a wooden shelf. And on that shelf, stacked neatly tied together with a length of pale string, was a bundle of envelopes, white envelopes yellowed at the edges. She did not need to count them. She would count them later. There were 22. The envelope on top, the one resting at the very top of the bundle, had a single line written across the front in a handwriting Hattie had not seen since she was a child, but recognized the way you recognize your own breath. Hattie, sweet girl, if you are reading this, it means I never made it back in time. She sat down on the floor of the RV. She did not remember sitting. The envelope from Walter was still clenched in her other hand. She had forgotten about it. She remembered now. With shaking fingers, she peeled the tape and opened it. Inside was a single folded $10 bill, and on the inside fold in the same handwriting 3 words, enough to start. Outside, the freight train sounded its long whistle again through the valley, and Hattie Mercer, 30 years old with $9 in her pocket, a sleeping daughter on the couch behind her, and 22 years of silence in front of her, lowered her head and finally let herself cry. She did not open the first letter that night. She could not. She held the bundle against her chest, the way a woman holds a newborn, and she rocked and she breathed. And somewhere in the middle of it, she slid down sideways onto the floor of the RV and pulled the log cabin quilt off the bed and around her shoulders. And she fell asleep there on the floor, with her cheek against the wood, the iron key in her fist, the $10 bill in her other hand, and a door behind her that had finally, after 23 years, opened. Morning came to the gas station parking lot the way it comes to small towns in the south. Slowly, pink at the edges, a thin gold line crawling across the tops of the mountains, lighting the freight tracks first, and the church steeple second, and finally finding its way to the cracked windshield of a rusted RV parked beyond the dumpsters. Hattie woke with her cheek on the wood floor and a sharp pain in her hip. For a long second, she did not know where she was. Then she felt the iron key still clenched in her palm, the $10 bill folded against her other thumb, and the soft breathing of her daughter somewhere behind her. And she remembered. She sat up slowly. Her back ached. The quilt slid off her shoulder. The bundle of 22 envelopes lay beside her on the floor, tied neat with their pale string untouched. She had not opened a single one. She had meant to. She had not been able to. Junie was still asleep on the couch, one small hand curled around the ear of the brown rabbit. Her cheeks were pink, but the fever had broken. Hattie placed the back of her hand against her daughter's forehead and felt the cool, damp skin and closed her eyes in something close to gratitude. "Okay, baby," she whispered. "Okay." There were practical things now. There had to be. She could not sit on the floor of a parked RV with 22 unopened letters and pretend the world had stopped. Junie would wake hungry. Junie would need a bathroom. Junie would need a real breakfast, not a sleeve of crackers from a coat pocket. Hattie put the iron key back around her neck. She placed the $10 bill carefully on top of the kitchenette counter, smoothed flat like a small altar. She tucked the bundle of letters into the cabinet above the bed and shut the brass pull behind them. They would wait. They had waited 22 years. They could wait an hour more. She went outside to see what she had bought. The morning air was cold and smelled of wet pine and diesel. The Sunoco was already open. A man in a yellow vest was hosing down the pump island. Hattie walked the length of the RV with her arms crossed against the cold, taking it in the way a woman takes in a house she has just inherited from a stranger. The tires were old, but they were not flat. The propane tank on the back was strapped on with a fresh black bungee cord. The license plate was current. Someone had paid the registration on this thing. Recently, she tried the driver's door. It opened. She climbed up into the seat, and the seat groaned under her, and she put her hands on the wheel and turned the key in the ignition. Nothing, not even a click. She tried again, and a third time. The dashboard lights flickered, once faint and then nothing. "Of course," she said to the empty dashboard. "Of course you don't start." She climbed back out. She walked once around the RV. She popped the hood the way her father had taught her on a Saturday morning when she was 9 years old, sitting on an upside-down milk crate beside their old Ford. She stared down at the engine. She did not recognize half of what she was looking at. She closed the hood again. She sat down on the second metal step of the door and pulled her knees up and looked across the parking lot at the pink mountains, and she thought, all right, Hattie. First a bathroom for the child, then food, then a job, then the rest. In that order. She woke Junie gently. The little girl rubbed her eyes and asked the question Hattie had been bracing for since the porch light. "Mama, when are we going back to Grandma's?" Hattie held her daughter's small face in both her hands and looked at her and said, "We are going on an adventure, baby. We are going to be brave today." Junie considered this with the serious focus of a 5-year-old. Then she nodded once and held up the rabbit. "Brave together," she said. Hattie's throat went tight. Brave together. The diner was a quarter-mile up the road, a low white building with a green tin roof and a hand-painted sign that read, "Blue Pine Diner," in letters that had been touched up many times. Hattie had walked past it 100 times in her life. She had never been inside. People like her mother did not eat in places where the coffee came in thick white mugs. A small bell rang over the door when they came in. The smell hit them both at once. Bacon, coffee, hot biscuits. Junie made a small sound that broke Hattie's heart. The woman behind the counter was tall and wide-shouldered in her early 70s, with grey hair pulled back in a soft braid, and the sleeves of her flannel shirt rolled up to her elbows. She had the wide forearms of a woman who had been carrying plates for 50 years. She looked up from the order pad, took in Hattie and Junie in one slow, careful sweep, and her face did something quiet. "Come on in, honey. Take that booth by the window. The sun gets it warm this time of morning." Hattie hesitated. "Ma'am, I have to be honest with you. I have $9 and I need to make it last." The woman set down her pad. She came around the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. She knelt down so she was eye to eye with Junie. "What's your name, sugar?" "Junie. Junie, my name is Ruth. Ruth Holloway. Do you like pancakes?" Junie nodded very seriously. Ruth stood up and looked at Hattie. There was nothing pitying in her face. There was only a kind of plain, straight understanding. "The pancakes are on the house this morning, honey. We always have batter left over from the early shift, and if we don't use it, it goes in the trash, and I have hated wasting food since before you were born. You sit, I'll bring coffee." Hattie wanted to argue. She wanted to protest. She wanted to say she did not need charity. But Junie was already climbing into the booth, and her small face was bright for the first time in 3 days. And Hattie understood that this was not the morning for pride. "Thank you," she said. The 2 words came out cracked. Ruth touched her shoulder once lightly. "Sit down, honey." The pancakes came with butter and warm syrup and a slice of orange on the side that Junie ate first the way children do. Hattie drank the coffee slowly. The warmth of the mug under her palms felt like the first kind thing the world had done for her in a week. When Ruth came back to refill the cup, she sat down across from Hattie without being asked. "You're Verla Pike's girl," she said. It was not a question. Hattie set her cup down. "Yes, ma'am." Ruth nodded slowly. She looked out the window at the parking lot for a moment, at the freight tracks beyond, at the mountains. Then she looked back. "I was sorry," she said quietly, "when I heard about your father a long time ago. I want you to know I was sorry then." Hattie's hand stilled on the mug. "You knew my father." Tom Mercer worked at the lumber mill on Beach Road for 9 years. He fixed my back door one summer when my husband was laid up. He would not take $1 for it. He sat on my back porch and drank lemonade and talked about you for 2 hours, about a little girl who loved birds. Ruth's mouth softened. "I knew your father, honey." Hattie did not trust her voice. She nodded. Ruth watched her for a long, careful moment. Then she said, "If you need work, I need a hand on the lunch shift, 11 to 3. I cannot pay you what you deserve. I can pay you what I have. And there is a back room with a sink and a kettle, and your girl is welcome to collar at the corner booth while you work. The customers will love her. They love anything small." Hattie opened her mouth and could not speak. She nodded again, harder this time. "Good," Ruth said. She stood up. "Eat your breakfast. We start at 11. She walked back behind the counter. She did not look back. She had done it the way people in small towns do, real kindness with no fuss and no expectation of thanks. Hattie pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth and breathed through her nose until she could speak again. By noon, she was tying on a borrowed apron. By one, she had spilled coffee on a man's jacket and apologized so many times. The man laughed and told her to hush. By two, she had learned the layout of the kitchen and the names of 3 of the regulars. By 3, Junie had drawn 17 pictures of birds on the back of paper placemats, and an old man in a John Deere cap had quietly paid for a slice of pie he did not order and asked Ruth to wrap it up for the little artist. Ruth handed Hattie $32 at the end of the shift. Cash, folded once. "That includes tips," Ruth said. "Don't argue with me, honey. The customers tipped you. I just held it." $32. Hattie had not held $32 in her own hand in a long, long time. She bought gas with 8 of it. She watched the old man at the pump teach her how to bleed the line into the carburetor of the RV, his big knuckled hands patient on the engine. He did not give her his name. He just nodded when it caught finally on the 4th try, sputtering and then settling into a low, rough idle. The whole RV shook around her. She laughed out loud. She had not laughed in a week. "Tell that engine she's loved," the old man said, wiping his hands on a rag. "She's been sleeping a long time." He walked away before she could thank him. He climbed into a battered green pickup and drove off down Route 9 without looking back. That night in the parking lot, Ruth had said she could use behind the diner. Hattie sat on the floor of the RV with Junie asleep on the bed and the log cabin quilt over her lap and the small lamp from the kitchenette pulled close. And she finally opened the first letter. The envelope was thinner than she expected. The paper inside was a single sheet folded twice. The date at the top was a date she would remember as long as she lived. It was 3 weeks after her 8th birthday. The handwriting hit her first. She had to look away for a moment before she could read. "Sweet girl, if you are reading this, then somewhere along the way you found the key and you found the door and you found these letters. I had to write that line first because it is the only way I can begin. I did not die in a car accident. Your mother knows. She has known from the start. I am asking you to read the rest of this letter before you hate her or me or both." Hattie's hand began to shake. She set the page down on her knee and pressed it flat with her palm. 3 months before you turned 8, I went to a doctor in Nashville. I had been losing things, words, balance, the names of tools I had used all my life. He sent me to a second doctor, and that doctor sent me to a third. And the third one sat me down and told me I had Huntington's. He told me what was coming. He told me how fast. He told me that the man you knew as your daddy would in a few years not be a man you would recognize. He told me there was nothing to be done. Hattie put her hand over her mouth. "I asked him one question, Hattie. I asked him if you would have to watch. He looked at me a long time. And he said, you can choose, Mr. Mercer. You can let her watch, or you can leave her a memory of you whole." I drove home that night, and I sat in our driveway for 2 hours with the engine off, and I made the worst and best choice of my life. Hattie was crying now without sound, the tears running clean down her face onto the paper, and she lifted the page so they would not smudge the ink. "Your mother fought me on it. Verla fought me for weeks. She begged me to let her tell you. She said you were strong enough. I said you were 8 years old and you should not have to be. In the end, I won. God forgive me. I won. And every wrong thing she has ever done to you since, sweet girl, she has done with that secret sitting on her chest like a stone, and I am the one who put it there." Hattie made a small broken sound. Junie shifted on the bed. Hattie pressed her wrist against her mouth. I left in the spring. The accident was real, but it was not mine. A man my size, an unclaimed body in the next county, a coroner who owed me a favor from the war. Verla buried an empty box. I went west. I worked driving long haul out of Memphis under another name for as long as my hands could hold the wheel. I sent money home through a friend in Chattanooga who has been sworn to silence and who has never once broken his word. The scholarship you received when you were 18. The one Verla said came from the church. Sweet girl, it came from me. Hattie was openly weeping now. The lamplight blurred in her vision. Behind her, the bundle of remaining letters sat on the floor untouched. 21 more. 21 more years of him. I'm ending this first letter here because I know it is enough for one night. There is more, and you will read it when you are ready. But before I close, I want to tell you one thing, Hattie Lee. I have never in any year of my life stopped loving you. I have only ever stopped being able to show you. There is a difference. Hold on to the difference. It is the only thing I have ever asked you for. The letter was signed at the bottom in the same slanted hand. Your daddy, Tom. Hattie folded the page. She held it against her chest. She sat on the floor of the rusted RV in the parking lot behind the Blue Pine Diner, with the iron key resting on her sternum and her daughter sleeping behind her. And she did not move for a long time. She read the second letter the next night, and the third the night after that. She paced herself. She had to. Each letter was a year of him. Each letter was a small wooden box she had to open carefully or break. In the fourth letter, written when she was 11, he wrote about driving past a school playground in Tennessee and seeing a girl in a yellow coat and crying for 2 miles. In the seventh, written when she was 14, he wrote about wanting to call her on her birthday and standing at a payphone in a truck stop in Oklahoma for 40 minutes before hanging up. In the 11th, written when she was 18, he wrote about the scholarship. He wrote about a friend named Walter Ennis, a man he had served with in Korea, who had agreed to keep an RV for him in a small town in North Carolina. Just in case. Just in case one day he could come back. Just in case one day she would find it. Hattie's hands trembled when she read Walter's name. She closed the letter carefully and went outside and stood under the diner's back light and looked up at the sky and said his name out loud to the stars. The days fell into a kind of rhythm she had not had in years. She worked the lunch shift. Junie drew birds at the corner booth and learned the names of all the regulars. The old man in the John Deere cap turned out to be named Henry Doss, and he came in every day at 11:30 for a cup of coffee and a slice of whatever pie Ruth had made, and he always left a folded dollar tucked under the edge of his plate for the artist. And Junie kept those dollars in a coffee can on the kitchenette counter and called it her bank. A widow named Margaret Coombs began leaving things on the step of the RV in the mornings. A small bag of apples, a loaf of bread wrapped in a dish towel, a pair of children's mittens hand-knit that fit Junie perfectly. Hattie never saw her drop them. Margaret never said a word in the diner about it. Once Hattie caught her eye over the rim of a coffee cup, and Margaret only smiled the smallest smile and looked down at her toast. The mechanic from the Sunoco, a young man named Cole, came over one afternoon and looked at the RV's engine for an hour and would not take a dime. And when Hattie pressed him on why, he shrugged and said, "Miss Ruth said." That was the whole answer. That was the whole town's answer. Miss Ruth said. Hattie read the 14th letter on a Tuesday night. She read the 18th on a Friday. She read the 21st letter on a quiet Sunday evening, with the rain ticking against the RV roof. And that was the letter where everything broke open. It was dated less than a year before. The handwriting in it was different, shakier, smaller. The letters of certain words leaned the wrong direction, the way her grandmother's writing had at the end. But the voice in it was unmistakably him. Sweet girl, I am writing this from a small rented room in Hollis Creek, North Carolina. I came home, I came back. The doctors gave me longer than they thought. And at the end of all those years, I could not bear the idea of dying anywhere but here, near the place where you were born. I am close to you, sweet girl. I am 18 miles from your front door tonight. Walter knows I am here. Your mother does not. I have written her a letter, and I will mail it when I have the courage. I want to see you before I go. I am praying for the courage to knock on your door. If you are reading this letter, then I either found it or I did not. Hattie set the page down. The rain on the roof was very loud. Junie was asleep behind her. The iron key was warm against her skin. He had been here, 18 miles, less than a year ago. She had not known. She had been working 2 jobs and tucking Junie into bed and arguing with her mother about grocery money. And 18 miles away, her father had been alive and trying to find the courage to knock on her door. She put her face down into her hands. She did not know how long she sat that way. Long enough that the rain stopped. Long enough that the diner went dark across the lot. Long enough that Junie woke once and called her name softly from the bed, and Hattie went and lay down beside her daughter and held her and did not sleep. In the morning before her shift, she walked across the gravel lot to the diner kitchen door. Ruth was already at the griddle. The smell of bacon was thick in the air. Hattie stood in the doorway with her coat still on and her hair undone, and Ruth looked at her once and turned off the burner. "What is it, honey?" Hattie said, "I need to go see my mother." Ruth wiped her hands slowly on her apron. She looked at Hattie for a long, careful moment, and there was something in her face that Hattie did not know how to read. "Hattie," she said gently, "before you go, there is something you should know, something I have been waiting on and I should not have waited." Hattie went still. "Your mother came in here yesterday afternoon," Ruth said. "After your shift. She came in alone. She sat in the back booth for an hour and she did not order anything. And before she left, she asked me to tell you something." Hattie's hand rose to the iron key. "What?" Ruth's eyes were soft and steady on her. "She said to tell you. Your father is buried in the old churchyard on Pine Hollow Road. The grave does not have his name on it. She said you would understand why. She said the date on the stone is 4 months ago, and she said she has been standing at that grave alone every Sunday since, and she said it is time for you to come home." Hattie did not move. She did not breathe. She had been too late by 4 months. 4 months. She turned without a word and walked out of the diner and across the parking lot and into the RV. She picked up her sleeping daughter from the bed. She wrapped Junie in the log cabin quilt. She climbed into the driver's seat with the child in her lap, and she turned the key in the ignition, and the engine caught on the first try the way her father's old Ford used to catch on Saturday mornings when she was 9 years old. She drove out onto Route 9 in the gray morning light toward Pine Hollow Road, toward an unmarked stone, toward a mother she did not know how to face, and a father she had missed by a single season. And the iron key swung once against her collarbone, and the $10 bill sat folded in the visor above her head. And Hattie Mercer drove east into the rising sun alone with her sleeping child toward a grave that did not bear her father's name. Pine Hollow Road climbed slowly out of the valley in a long, easy curve. and the morning fog lifted from the pasture fences in white ribbons as the RV labored up the grade. Junie woke in her mother's lap halfway up the hill and asked no questions. Children sometimes know. The old church sat at the top of the rise the way it had sat for 140 years. White clapboard, a narrow steeple, a pair of stone steps worn into shallow bowls by generations of Sunday shoes. Beside it, separated by a low iron fence, was the churchyard. Hattie had been brought here as a child for the funerals of people whose names she could no longer remember. She had never once thought to walk among these stones looking for her father. She parked the RV in the gravel lot. She lifted Junie down from her lap and set her gently on the bench seat and wrapped the quilt tighter around her small shoulders. She kissed the crown of her daughter's head. "Mama is going to walk out there for a little while, baby. I will be right where you can see me. You stay warm." Junie nodded once the rabbit clutched under her chin. "Brave together," she said sleepily. Hattie's eyes filled. "Brave together." She stepped out into the cold, bright morning. The grass along the path was silver with frost. A pair of crows called from the pine grove behind the church. She walked through the iron gate and into the rows of stones, and she did not need anyone to tell her where to go. She knew in the way a daughter knows. There was a stone near the back of the yard set apart under a young dogwood that had been planted recently enough that the soil around it was still raised. The stone was simple, a plain gray rectangle no taller than her knee. There was no name on it. There was no date of birth. There was only a single carved date 4 months past, and beneath the date in letters so finely cut they looked almost like handwriting. The words she had read in Walter's hands on the night she met him. "For the girl with the iron key." Hattie stood very still. The wind moved through the dogwood above her, and a single dry leaf came loose and tumbled down and settled at the base of the stone. She watched it land. She did not pick it up. She knelt down in the frosted grass. Her hand went the way it always went to the cord around her neck. She lifted the iron key over her head and held it for a long moment in her open palm, and then she set it gently, deliberately, on the top of the stone. The metal made a small, clean sound against the granite. "I came, Daddy," she said. Her voice was thin and steady. "I came." She did not weep, not yet. The weeping would come later. For now there was only the long, slow letting out of a breath she had been holding since she was 8 years old. Behind her, the gravel of the lot crunched under tires. Hattie did not turn around. She knew before she looked. Verla Pike got out of her car alone. She was wearing the dark coat she always wore to church, the one with the small pearl button at the throat. She crossed the gravel slowly. She stopped at the iron gate as though asking permission to come further. When Hattie did not move, did not speak, Verla pushed the gate open and walked the path between the stones, and she came to a stop 3 steps behind her daughter and waited. For a long minute, the only sound was the wind in the dogwood and the distant crows. "I have been here every Sunday," Verla said quietly. "I did not know how to ask you to come." Hattie did not turn. She kept her eyes on the iron key resting on the stone. "You could have just told me, Mama." "I know. For 22 years. I know." Hattie's voice did not rise. There was no room in her that morning for the kind of anger that rises. There was only the slow, deep ache of all those Sundays, all those birthdays, all those nights she had cried into a pillow as a girl with no idea that her father was alive in a truck stop, somewhere reading the date on a calendar and crying too. "I have read his letters, Mama, all of them. I know what he asked of you." Verla's breath caught. "I know it was his choice," Hattie said. "I am not standing here to tell you it was yours. I am standing here because I do not want to spend the rest of my life carrying this the way you have carried it." The older woman made a small sound, the sound a person makes when something they have braced against for 2 decades suddenly gives way. Hattie heard her sink down onto the grass behind her. She still did not turn. "He came back," Verla said. Her voice was breaking. "He came back almost a year ago. He sent me a letter. He told me he was in Hollis Creek. He told me he wanted to see you. He asked me to bring you, and Hattie waited. "I was so afraid," Verla whispered. "I had told you he was dead for 22 years. I did not know how to undo it. I thought, if I just waited a little longer, if I just waited until I was brave enough." And then Walter called me one Tuesday morning in June and told me he was gone. He had gone in his sleep in the rented room with the window open and the radio on, and I had waited too long. I had waited him into the ground. Hattie closed her eyes. It was the second twist, although she would not name it that until much later. Sitting at the kitchenette table in the RV, writing it all down in a journal she kept for Junie to read someday. Verla had known. Verla had been given the chance. Verla had failed. And Verla had been carrying that failure alone for 4 months, while her daughter served pancakes 18 miles away and slept in a rusted RV in a gas station parking lot, and did not know that her own mother was breaking apart in silence. Hattie turned around at last. Verla was on her knees in the frost. Her hands were pressed flat against her thighs, palms down the way a person holds themselves together when there is nothing else to hold. She was not crying loudly. She was crying the way women of her generation cried, with her mouth closed and her eyes open and the tears simply falling. Hattie did not run to her. She did not embrace her, not yet. There would be time for that in a smaller room on a quieter day. What she did was kneel in the grass in front of her mother, close enough that their knees almost touched, and she reached out and placed her own hand palm up open between them. She did not say a word. Verla looked at the hand for a long time. Then she lowered her own hand on top of it. The two hands rested there between them in the cold grass, and the iron key sat on the stone behind Hattie. And somewhere in the pine grove the crows called once more, and then went silent. And that was the moment, although neither woman knew to name it, when the worst of it ended. They sat with the stone for a long while. Verla told her about the day Tom had come home in the spring, about the small rented room over the hardware store on Maple Street, about the chair he had sat in by the window watching the school bus go by every afternoon at 3:15, because Verla had once told him in a letter that Hattie used to ride that same route. He had never knocked on her door. He had waited. He had been waiting for the iron key to find its way back to him on its own. He had believed Verla said that some things had to be found, not delivered. He said, Verla whispered, that if you came to him, it would mean you were ready. And if you did not, it would mean he had not earned it. He would not let me bring you. He said it would not count if I brought you. Hattie looked at the unmarked stone. She understood suddenly the line carved across the granite. For the girl with the iron key. He had not been waiting for a daughter. He had been waiting for a woman who had walked far enough through her own life to find him. She picked the iron key up off the stone. She held it tight in her closed fist. She felt the small bow of it press into her palm. "Mama," she said, "I want to show you something. Will you come?" Walter Ennis met them at the door of the small rented room over the hardware store on Maple Street that same afternoon. He had been keeping it for her. He had not let the landlord rent it out. He had paid 4 months of rent from his own pocket because he said simply, it was not mine to clear. The room was small and clean and full of light. The window faced the street. There was a single bed made up with a white cover. There was a wooden chair by the window. There was a small chest of drawers with a brass lamp on top. And on the top of the chest of drawers sat a carved wooden box about the size of a loaf of bread. And beside it, an envelope with Hattie's name written across the front in the same handwriting that had written her 22 letters. Junie sat on the white bed with the brown rabbit in her lap, watching her mother with her serious 5-year-old eyes. Verla stood in the doorway with both hands clasped at her waist. Walter waited in the hall. Hattie opened the box first. Inside, on a folded square of blue cloth, lay a small carved bird. Not a chickadee this time. A wren. A wren the size of a child's palm, with its head turned slightly and one wing lifted as if it had been caught a half-second before flight. The wood was polished smooth. The eye had been carved with great care. "Oh," Hattie said. The same small words she had said the night she stepped into the RV and smelled cedar. Oh. It was the wren he had carved her when she was 6. The wren she had lost in the move after he died. The wren she had cried over for a week. He had not made her another wren. He had made her the same wren. He had remembered. She lifted it out of the box with both hands. Beneath the cloth in the bottom of the box was a small bank passbook in her name. She did not open it then. She would open it later alone in the cab of the RV at a stoplight on Route 9, and she would see the number written inside, and she would have to pull over for 10 minutes before she could drive again. It was not a fortune. It was not what the world calls a fortune. It was enough. Enough for the back rent on the small house on the edge of town that the bank had taken from her 2 years before. Enough for the first 3 months of a new life. Enough to start. The third twist, the one that broke her open clean, was inside the envelope. The letter was short. The handwriting was the shakiest of any she had read. It had been written, she would learn from Walter, in the last week of his life. "Sweet girl, the doctors told me when you were born that the gene that took my mother and would take me has a way of passing on. They said your chance was even. I could not bear it. I drove to a clinic in Knoxville the week you turned 1. I paid a man cash for a test that did not officially exist. I sat in a parking lot for an hour with the envelope in my lap before I could open it. The test came back clear. You did not carry it. You never would. You are free, Hattie. You have been free since you were 1 year old. I never told your mother. I never told anyone. I carried that small mercy alone the way I carried the rest. I am writing this now because I want you to know before anything else that the road in front of you is open. Whatever I gave you, sweet girl, I did not give you this. Live, Hattie. Live the long open life I could not. Live it for both of us. It was signed simply, Your Daddy. Hattie sat down on the edge of the white bed. She held the carved wren against her chest. Junie crawled into her lap without being asked, and Verla came across the room and sat down beside her, and Walter stood in the doorway with his cap held against his stomach, and none of them spoke. There was no need. Outside the window, the late afternoon light came slanting in low across the rooftops of Hollis Creek, and somewhere a freight train sounded its long whistle through the valley. And Hattie Mercer wept quietly with her daughter in her lap, and her mother's hand on her back, and a wooden bird in her palm, and an iron key warm against her skin. And the weeping was not the weeping of grief alone. It was the weeping of a woman setting something down for the first time in 23 years. 6 months later, on a clear morning in early spring, the RV sat parked in the side yard of a small white house at the end of Beach Road. The dogwood by the porch was just beginning to flower. A pair of robins had built a nest under the eaves. There was a hand-carved sign nailed beside the front door that read in Hattie's own painted letters, "The Wren House." Junie sat on the porch steps in a yellow coat drawing birds on the back of an old paper placemat. The brown rabbit sat beside her propped against the rail. Inside in the warm kitchen that smelled of coffee and biscuits, Ruth Holloway and Margaret Coombs were laughing about something at the table, and Verla was at the stove turning bacon, and Walter Ennis was sitting in the rocking chair by the window with his cap on his knee and a cup of coffee in his hand, watching the dogwood bloom. In the bedroom at the back of the house, in a small frame on the wall above the dresser, hung the original 22 letters, each one pressed flat behind glass. Beside the frame on a small shelf sat the carved wren, and on the windowsill where the morning sun would catch it first lay a single folded $10 bill, smoothed flat the way Hattie had smoothed it that first cold morning on the kitchenette counter of a rusted RV in a gas station parking lot. The bill was not for spending. It was not for keeping, it was for remembering. The iron key still hung from a leather cord around Hattie's neck. She wore it every day. Sometimes when she stood at the kitchen sink in the evenings and watched her daughter chase fireflies in the yard, she would close her hand around it without thinking, the way her father had once closed his hand around a coffee cup on a porch in a long-ago summer. And she would feel in that small warm shape against her palm the door that had been waiting for her all those years, and the man on the other side of it, and the long open road he had told her to walk. Some doors stay locked for a long time, friend. Not because the world is cruel, not because we are unworthy, but because on the other side of them, something has been waiting for us to grow into the woman or the man who can open them gently without breaking what is inside. You may have a door like that in your own life tonight. A letter you have not opened, a phone call you have not made, a name you have not spoken aloud in years, a box in an attic, a photograph in a drawer, a word you have been meaning to say to your mother or your son, or a stranger who once was kind to you when you had nothing. You do not have to open it tonight. You only have to know that it is there, and that when you are ready, the key will be closer than you think. So tell me, friend, tonight in the quiet of wherever you are, what door has been waiting for you? What letter have you not opened? Leave it in the comments below. Tell me your name. Tell me where you are listening from. Tell me what time it is on your clock. I will read everyone. I always do. And if this story has settled something quiet inside you, the way it settled something quiet in me to tell it, take a moment before you sleep tonight and subscribe to this little channel so that the next story I tell will find its way to your door. Sleep well, friend. Rest easy. The wren is still on the windowsill. The key is still warm. And somewhere in some small town in America tonight, a woman is opening a door she has been carrying the key to her whole life. Good night.